But I kind of did something this last week that was kind of on the borderline. And at first it was really funny and absolutely hilarious. But then as the news cycle continued on, I felt really bad about what I did. But I wanted to just to ask you to just, if you can, kind of focus on the funny part of that instead of like the part that it's kind of turned into, okay, can we do that? And also remember that your pastor is human, and sometimes we can do really dumb things, okay? So with that being said, let me tell you about what happened. So at the beginning of the week, I kind of had this idea. You guys ever have an idea that kind of comes across your brain waves, and you're like, oh, this is gonna be fun? Anybody? And I gotta tell you, Pastor Teresa, when I first moved up here, she used to call me this word. What'd she say? Sassy. I never understood that word, because we don't use that word, just like bubbler. We don't use that word either, outside of Wisconsin, because it means something different out there than it does here. But anyways, I had this sassy moment, and I thought, this would be a great idea. And so in the back of my mind, I waited patiently for a whole week. And those that know me know that waiting patiently for a whole week is really a feat on its own. And finally, the day came. It was Friday. I had my physical therapy appointment. And I had, of course, as you guys know, had the knee issue. So I've spent a lot of time with those that work at the physical therapy office. So, I walked up there, and of course, there they are. They're working hard. They don't even pick up their heads up to see who's coming in, but they're just working hard, and they always go through the same kind of routine, the same mindset, the same group of questions. And you walk up to them, and the first thing they ask you, with their head down. And by the way, I got to tell you, when I walked up to the booth, it was kind of interesting. They had these masks there you're supposed to put on and then make fun. They're great because you can make faces at people and they can't tell that you're really making faces. Then there's this hand sanitizer that you could use, and even these pens that, one cup was for the clean pens and one cup was for the dirty pens. So I walk up to this booth, and she's plugging along, and first question she asks me is your name? And I said, Bob Wetzler. And she said, address, 802 North Ashton Avenue, date of birth, 9/10/76. Do you have a temperature or a fever? I said, no. She says, have you traveled outside of Wisconsin the last month? And I said, yes, I just got back from China. Said, I'm sorry. So at that very moment, I got to tell you, I've never seen this, but literally, like the blood just went completely out of her. I mean, she is as white as a ghost. And at that point, I had her attention, and she just froze. And slowly, she looked up at me with this fear in her eyes and like total panic. And I thought, I could really keep going. I could really keep going. And at that moment, I thought, I'm sure she has a button somewhere. Because Teresa has a button. I don't know if you know this, but she has a button that if she's scared about you, that she's intimidated or somebody's freaking her out or crazy people come along, she hits the button, the police show up. So I knew that this lady probably had that button and maybe even another one for the CDC. So after kind of getting the vision of the police coming in, tackling me, and the people in the white coats coming to take me away, I figured I better end the charade. So I said, just kidding. I didn't. And then I said, well, actually, my step-grandmother just did get back from China. Again. But, it was so interesting because fear automatically just grabbed her, and she started kind of creating this narrative about what was going on, what was happening. She filled in the blanks. All she had was the fact that this guy was standing before her, that she didn't even look up to see me. But now, all of a sudden, she knew, and she was ready for this next step. And of course, afterwards, she laughed it off and shared with everybody. And then the guy that I was seeing told me never to do it again. Like I said, I repented. But it's interesting how quickly fear can take over, right? As you guys know, we've been in this series called A New Thing. And in this series, we've talked about the fact that as a believer, God has given us an opportunity to thrive instead of just survive. That in life, there are challenges and there are things that we interact with that can sometimes be overwhelming, especially when you allow your emotions to rule you instead of you ruling your emotions. That God has actually given us these emotions to help us to engage life and to engage life successfully. So we've talked about joy, we've talked about disgust, we've talked about, all these different emotions. And today we're, as you can tell, or maybe not, talking about fear. Now you're probably thinking, Pastor, wait a second. Isn't fear unbiblical? Doesn't 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 said, we're not born of a spirit of fear. God's not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. And I want to tell you, you're absolutely right, Bible scholars. You're absolutely right. God's not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. But that word for fear there in the New Testament is based off of a Greek word named delias. And this word actually means cowardness. So it makes absolute sense that God has not given us a spirit of cowardness, but a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. But the fear I'm talking about goes back to the Hebrew word for fear, which is yirah. And in that word, it means that of reverence, of respect. The Bible says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. That there is this fear that God has given us. It is a warning sign to help us to not do anything that could endanger us, right? For instance, you might be laying in bed and all of a sudden you hear something going across the wall. You turn on the light and you see the biggest spider you've ever seen. Jamie, feeling it. Jamie loves spiders, by the way. Just kidding. No, she doesn't. She hates them. And so this big spider is coming across the wall. So what do? Fear, you're not going to have a spirit of cowardness. You're not going to run away from this spider. This is your house, right? So you're going to pick up your wife's pillow, sorry, honey, and you're going to take that pillow and you're going to smash that spider into oblivion. Fear, you're not going to be overcome by this, but you're going to respect it. You're going to make sure that thing is dead. You're gonna look at it. How many of you guys know what I'm talking about? If you smash a spider, the first thing you do is flip over the shoe, flip over the pillow. You're gonna make sure that thing is dead. You don't want it coming back to life. No Pet Cemetery stuff here. That thing is gone, right? Because you want to make sure that there's no threat that thing could come back and get you when you're sleeping, right? It's a healthy fear. It's a healthy fear. It's based off of respect. But sometimes a fact gets corroded by fiction. You create a narrative around a fact. And all of a sudden, that fact becomes a lot scarier. And now that cowardness comes out. I think one of the best examples of this is found in our text for today, found in Genesis chapter 25, through 34. Now, I want to tell you, we're not going to go through all 25 through 34, okay? But in this is a story of a man by the name of Jacob. You see, Jacob oftentimes allowed the things of this world, the facts that he knew, get corroded by fiction. In this story in particular, it's kind of a neat story because it's a story that kind of comes alive. I love when a Bible story really comes alive, And as you're reading along, it's like you just can't put the book down because you get so caught into it. And the story of Jacob is definitely like that. I mean, really, it's one of those that just is so exciting to read because it starts off, you've got the sibling rivalry, and you've got deceit, and you've got revenge and adventure and love. And it's got all the elements of a great story. You see, those that are familiar with Jacob know that when he started off in his life, he was born with a twin. And just like any twin, just like any sibling, there's sometimes rivalry that took place. You see, Jacob was the second born, and during that time, within that culture, the firstborn, Esau, would have inherited the family share of the business. In fact, he would have inherited the blessing of the father. Every good thing really would have gone right to Esau, not to Jacob. Could you imagine kind of knowing, from birth, the boy, if I would have just been a second earlier, everything else would have been okay? But you just missed it by a second. Well, of course, those that are familiar with the story, and maybe those that aren't, Jacob and his mother come up with this plan to try to deceive their father. So what they do is Jacob goes up and acts like his brother Esau, and his brother Esau apparently had an issue with hair, and so he ended up putting on some woolly sleeves, acting like he was his brother, and smelled like his brother because his brother was a hunter, all in a way to try to deceive their blind father. And of course, his father gives him the blessing. Well, how many know that if you have a brother or sister out there, if you steal something from them, oh boy, you better run. Well, exactly the same thing happened there. Of course, Esau was enraged because his brother Jacob stole his blessing. So Jacob did the most logical thing. He ran. And the younger brothers and sisters know what I'm talking about. When your older brother or sister comes after you, you run. You run to mom, you run to dad. You know, where he ran, okay? And he ran over to his uncle Laban's house, and he spends the next 20 years there. And of course, there he ends up encountering God in a powerful way. He ends up maturing in his faith and maturing as a man. He ends up finding love. He ends up starting a new family. He ends up increasing as well, because he actually, ironically, he ended up stealing a blessing that he never got to really hold on to. You see, his brother still inherited the blessing. He ran away. All he had was a stick. And God blessed him tremendously in this foreign land. So he of course, just like any story, it's not over till the credits roll. And Jacob then is told by God to go home to his childhood land. And that's what we're going to pick up today in Genesis chapter 32, verses 3 through 8. It says, then Jacob sent messengers ahead to his brother Esau, who was living in the region of Seir, in the land of Edom. He told him, give this message to my master Esau. Humble greetings from your servant Jacob. Boy, he's really pouring on thick, isn't he? Until now, I have been living with Uncle Laban, and now I own cattle, donkeys, flocks of sheep and goats, and many servants, both men and women. I have sent these messengers to inform my Lord of my coming, hoping that you will be friendly to me. After delivering the message, the messengers returned to Jacob and reported, we met your brother, Esau, and he is already on his way to meet you with an army of 400 men. Jacob was terrified at the news. He divided his household along with the flocks and the herds and the camels into two groups. He thought if Esau meets one group and attacks it, perhaps the other group can escape. Now, I got to tell you, I think this side of fear is definitely more on the cowardice side of fear with Jacob. You see, what's really ironic is because Jacob met God. Jacob spent time with the Lord. Jacob had developed this spiritual maturity and yet has seen God provide over and over and over again. But when the moment came where he heard that 400 men were coming after him, in his mind, he panicked. He didn't trust in God. You see, that's what I'm talking about. Jacob's fact was that his brother was coming to meet him. And he had 400 men, an army. Now, that's the facts. That's the simple fact. Yet Jacob began to create a narrative around it. And you know, his past experience probably helped that narrative. His brother was never necessarily very kind to him as a kid growing up. And so knowing that the last thing that he did the last thing his brother said to you was, I'm going to kill you. You put that in the fact that there was an army coming after you. It's kind of easy to create a narrative that they're coming to kill you, right? And then of course we see Jacob come up with this plan. Well, if I just go up and I put this bribe forward and I send all of these things, these gifts, maybe that'll appease them so I won't kill everybody. You know, in the back of his mind, he created this world of fear and anxiety. He created a narrative that wasn't based on a fact, but based on fiction. You see, that's where fear really becomes corrupted. Because what's meant to be a healthy respect of what's happening in life quickly transforms into something that terrifies us, that literally stops us from moving forward. You know, a proper view of fear would be the fact that you know you're going to be going to Yellowstone. And so you're going to be doing some hikes there, knowing that there are things out there like rattlesnakes and bears. You're gonna go and grab some bear spray. You're gonna grab a rattlesnake kit. You're gonna get one of those little bells that makes noise. You're gonna bring an air horn. You're gonna invite your cousin that can't really run that fast. You know, you're gonna do all these things you can't. Just kidding, don't do that, that's mean. I know what you guys are thinking. But you're going to do all these things to prepare yourself for this encounter, to make sure that you can survive and thrive in this world. That's a healthy fear. That's that Hebrew word for fear, that word that derives itself from respect. But yet where the danger comes is you begin to create this narrative saying, well, these bears, they must just like me. They want to eat me. You start watching TV shows of when bears attack, right? You begin to create this narrative to the point that you don't even get out of your house. You don't go on the trip to Yellowstone. You don't even go down the street. You stay right there because those bears, they may know where you live. They could have Google, right? And you begin to panic. And that's so often what happens. You see, God has given us this emotion to be able to interact properly with the world, to be able to warn us of danger, to be able to keep us safe. But yet, when we allow the narrative that we create to overshadow that, then we become petrified. Become petrified. And I got to tell you guys, this isn't just somebody for people that may have never experienced God, because Jacob had experienced God. Jacob had seen God over and over again bless him tremendously. His uncle Laban was not a great guy. He was the type of guy that warrants that advice, never go into business with family members. Okay? He was the guy that just wanted to try to steal away everything he possibly could from anybody he possibly could. He wasn't a great guy. But yet in the midst of that, God blessed him over and over and over again. So Jacob had experienced the blessing of God, but yet when faced with something that was unknown, when faced with something that should have been a healthy fear, he should have gone to God, but instead of going to God, he went to the panic mode. He began to create a narrative. And friends, that's where the danger comes in. Let's pick up our story in Genesis chapter 32, verses 9 through 12. It says, "Then Jacob prayed, O God of my grandfather Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, you told me, return to your own land and to your relatives. You promised me, I will treat you kindly. I am not worthy of all the unfailing love and faithfulness you have shown me, your servant. When I left home and crossed the Jordan River, I owned nothing except a walking stick. Now my household fills 2 large camps. Oh Lord, please rescue me from the hand of my brother Esau. I am afraid that he is coming to attack me along with my wives and children. You promised me, and surely treat you, and I will surely treat you kindly, and I will multiply your descendants until they become as numerous as the sands along the seashore, too many to count." You see, Jacob went to God pleading for God to move. See, Jacob was panicked. And he saw God as this person that just kind of created this world and said, okay, have at it, you're on your own. Now I got to ask you, those that are parents of, let's say, kids that have now left the nest. Even though your children are no longer in your house, your love for them doesn't stop, does it? You continue to pray for them. You continue to call them, to make sure that they're still alive. You continue to reach out for them because they're your kids. And our Heavenly Father, He doesn't just create a relationship with us and then say, okay, you got your tools. Peace out, my brother. And just kind of sit back and watch you interact with the world. God doesn't do that. God doesn't abandon us as orphans, as His word tells us. He is there with us every step of the way. But yet in the midst of an intimidating moment, automatically, instead of believing that God actually has a plan and a purpose for our situation, we go into panic mode. We create a narrative around it. And what we know as fact quickly becomes a fiction, and it terrifies us. The good news is that there's another way of looking at life. There's another way that's much safer and much more effective. And that's the way we see that Jesus lived His life. As we talked about before in the series, that, oftentimes we focus on Jesus as the miraculous side of Jesus. because Jesus was both fully God and fully man. And so we look at all the power that Jesus wielded, and you see this as a testimony to the fact that he was God incarnate. We see this power and we focus on this miracle, and that this Jesus, there was nothing that he had to be afraid of, nothing that intimidated him, because he had the authority, the power of God to do anything. But yet, when you look at the human side of Jesus, when you look at how he interacted with the world, friends, that's where we really get a heads up as far as the way God designed humanity to function. You see, God created humanity not just to survive, but in fact to thrive in this world. He's given us every tool we need to be a success. And by looking at Jesus as a template, it helps us to understand it. We've done that through this entire series. Well, today's no different. You know, when you look at Jesus, probably the most, I guess you would say, time that Jesus really had to respect what he was facing happened the night he was betrayed. Now, for those that know the story, you know, Matthew chapter 26 is where we're going to be today. Jesus had just finished having supper with his best friends, with his disciples, those who were closest to him. He had just spent the evening laughing and talking to them and reminiscing of all the things that have happened, the stories they've told to each other, and just the life that they've experienced together. But it was in that moment that Jesus also knew what was to come. You see, Jesus knew what he was facing. Jesus knew what was heading his way. And as he left that time with his disciples, he stopped off in this garden known as the Garden of Gethsemane. Now, for those that are familiar with the layout of Jerusalem during this time, you know, you have the garden, and then right above it, so there's a hillside that goes right up to the Temple Mount. On the other side of the Temple Mount is where they believe Golgotha was. So here's Jesus praying in this garden scene, crying out to the Lord, knowing that he is about to be the lamb that is going to be sacrificed for humanity. You know, the difference between, let's say, Jacob and Jesus is that Jacob was guessing. He was making his best guess of what lay ahead. He was guessing that his brother may be still mad at him after 20 years. He was guessing that these 400 men were not coming to protect him, but to kill him. He was creating this narrative. Jesus didn't have to create the narrative. He knew what was going to come ahead of him. He knew that one of those trusted disciples, one of his trusted friends, was about to betray him with a kiss. Wasn't just about to point him out, but literally walked up to him and kissed him as a sign, this is the man you're looking for. He knew that he would go through this monkey trial, that was all this false evidence would be brought up against him. He knew that later on he would be paraded before the people as a fraud and a phony. And the very people that cried out that he was Hosanna, he was the one that comes in the name of the Lord, are now the people that are crying, crucify him, because now he's been arrested by the people that he was supposed to deliver them from. He knew the beating that was going to follow, the abuse, the mockery. He knew that he was going to be paraded through the streets and then hung naked on a cross for all to point at, to laugh at and say, this is the Messiah. He knew the pain that he was going to endure. And what was his process? How did he deal with this? What did he create a narrative? How did he interact with this thing that honestly should terrify everybody, knowing what would lie ahead? In Matthew chapter 26, it says this, then Jesus went with them to the olive grove called Gethsemane. He said, sit here while I go over there to pray. He took Peter and Zebedee's two sons, James and John, and he became anguished and distressed. He told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. He went on a little further and bowed his face to the ground, praying, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me. Yet, I want your will to be done, not mine. Then he returned to his disciples and found them asleep. He said to Peter, couldn't you watch with me even an hour, even 1 hour? Keep watch and pray so that you will not give in to the temptation. For the spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Then Jesus left them for a second time and prayed, my Father, if this cup cannot be taken away unless I drink it, your will be done. When he returned to them again, he found them sleeping, for they couldn't keep their eyes open. You see, Jesus had this holy fear, this yira. He knew that God had the power and the authority to do the impossible. He knew that God had a plan and a purpose for every step of his life. And he knew that even though he was going to face this abuse and this death, he knew it was for God's glory. He knew that it was through this step that humanity would be saved. So instead of saying, God, please get me out of this. God, please help me. Please rescue me. He says, God, not my will, but yours be done. Saying, I trust in you. You see, that was based off of a holy fear. He knew that God could handle it. He knew that what he faced didn't have to crush him. He knew that what he faced was for a reason and that God had great things in store. So he said, Lord, if this cup cannot be taken out of my hands, then let your will be done. Let your will be done. Guys, I got to tell you, it's in that moment that we begin to understand who God is. His power, his ability. Proverbs was written by one of the smartest guys that ever lived, the Bible tells us. In chapter 9, verse 10, it says, fear of the Lord is a foundation of wisdom. Knowledge of the Holy One results in good judgment. You see, the more you know about God, the more you trust in him. The more you can say, God, this doesn't make sense, but God, I trust you. God, I know that this is intimidating, but God, I know you're going to get me through it. I know you're going to lead me down the right path. And God, if this cup can't pass from my hand, Lord, not my will, but yours be done, because I trust you. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen, but Lord, I trust you. I trust you. See, in our world today, it's so easy, right? To just give in to the fear, to create a narrative. You find out that there's a bunch of layoffs coming. And so you automatically, your mind creates from that fact that there are layoffs coming to a fiction saying, well, they don't like me. My boss doesn't like me. So therefore, I'm going to be laid off, and then I'm going to be broke, and then my family's going to disown me, and then I'll be homeless. And you start going down this pathway, right? Or you end up getting a call from the doctor. He says, hey, I wanted to talk to you. Please call me back. You begin to create a narrative around that fact. You say, well, it's got to be bad news. Why would a doctor call me? Doctors never call anybody. This is definitely bad news. And you start going down this narrative, and before you know, you've formed this huge ball that starts rolling down like Indiana Jones about to crush you, right? And you're chasing in front of you, you're running away from it, and you're so terrified of what's happening. But it started off so simple, so small. Maybe you just didn't pay your bill, right? But we create this narrative around it. We think, well, it's got to be cancer or Ebola or something, right? Why would a doctor call me? Or maybe you get a call or a text message from your spouse and they say, hey, we need to talk. Oh no, your mind starts rushing through all the things like maybe she saw the spider guts on the back of the pillow. You create this narrative around it. It's so easy to do that. Why? Why, when we have a God that has been faithful, we have a God that has been true, that time and time again, we have seen his deliverance. We have seen his power. We've seen his majesty. Why do we go to a narrative when we've got a fact that tells us that God will not abandon his children as orphans? Amen. And friends, that's the kind of holy fear we're supposed to have. It makes sense, doesn't it, that when you look at it from that perspective, 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7, that we're not born, that God has not given us a spirit of cowardness, but a spirit of love, power, and a sound mind. Yes, as a believer, knowing that we've got a God that loves us, that cares about us, we are not born of a spirit of cowardness. We don't have to be intimidated by the things that are happening in life, even if it's even death itself. We don't have to fear it because our God is our deliverer. Our God is our sustainer, and our God is eternal. We function in the natural, but God functions in the supernatural. If we could have the ushers come forward, we're gonna take communion. And we do this each month because it's a moment for us to kind of go back to that moment that Jesus had with his disciples. Because before everything fell apart, before his disciples would abandon him, where Peter himself would deny him 3 times, prophetically fulfilling what Jesus had said would happen. Before Judas would go betray him with a kiss, Jesus met with his disciples and he cemented the fact that he loved them, that he was laying his life down for them. You know, because it's interesting because he did this before tragedy struck. Because it was meant to sustain him through the midst of it. It was meant to say that when all this stuff happens, wait a second, Jesus told us this was gonna happen. He prepared us for this moment. We don't have to panic. As Jesus looked at Peter in the garden, in his olive grove, he says, pray so you don't fall into temptation. He knew, he knew what was gonna be ahead of Peter. He knew the struggle that Peter was gonna have, that his faith was gonna buckle. So he said, Peter, come on, pray up, get ready for this disaster, get ready for this challenge, because I know that God is giving you the strength to overcome. Come on, Peter, pray, get ready for it. Communion is meant to be a moment for us to put aside all of the fears, all of the narratives that we've created around our life, and to focus on the fact that our God has laid down his life for us.
Hey, thank you for watching Woodland Church YouTube channel. If you enjoy this message, take a minute, click the subscribe button on your screen. In that way, you don't have to miss a single video. And if this ministry has impacted you, and you'd like to partner with us to continue to reach others, you can click the link in the description below to give now. Thanks again for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.